May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I bring you greetings from the Green Mountain state of Vermont. And I feel so honored to be here with you celebrating the life and ministry of Absalom Jones in his diocese. This is a first for me. And I'm also exceedingly grateful that you all have stewarded his legacy for the Episcopal Church. Blessed Absalom is a sign of who God intends us to be as a church in this nation and in the world. And I wonder what Blessed Absalom would think of the times in which we're living and what lessons he would have us learn. What might he teach us and have us do about global warming? What might he teach us and have us do about the mass incarceration of people of color or the deaths of people like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or Tyree Nichols? What might he have done about the health disparities the COVID-19 pandemic forced society to see? What might he have done about the insurrection and current racial and political upheaval we're facing? What might he teach us and have us do about white Christian nationalism? My friends, I'm sorry. I don't want to bring us down because, after all, this is a celebration. But you know, Blessed Absalom reminds us of where we've been, how far we've come, and where we still need to go, and of the heights to which we can ascend. And I don't know what he would say to us about the travails of our times, but I feel pretty confident that he would tell us to keep the faith and to rely on the friendships that support and validate our dignity as we do justice in this world and in a church with a complicated history and call. I think he might tell us to take to heart the wisdom found in the 4th chapter of Ephesians. Lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. He would help us to have a discerning mind about patience and unity. We are not called to patience with injustice, but instead patience with oneself for being frustrated with the challenges of this day. Patience with allies who sometimes, because they always do, say or do the wrong thing from time to time. And as we work together as a diverse church, especially for patience and humility when one is corrected or invited to correct a wrong or a broken trust. We must always remember patience that denies the dignity of another is not patience. It is abuse, it is gaslighting, and it is cowardly. The call for unity in this passage takes on a different tone when applied to a denomination that has created unity out of a tradition which centers white Western culture. What does unity mean when it comes to the diversity our church is called to embody? While we worship on land that belongs to others, and with a history of colonialism, what does achieving unity even mean? Unity requires us to challenge the status quo, learn our history, and how if we know our history well, it invites us to repent and change, as it also reminds us of who we can be at our best. Unity requires conciliation and reconciliation. Those are not the same things. So I have to make a distinction between reconciliation and conciliation. Reconciliation is, it's about breaking something or repairing something that has been broken. But with conciliation, typically there is a mediator who is not always partial. This is legal stuff even. And so this impartial mediator, they come to bring about an agreement, resolution, or justice. So you see, the systemic racism and other isms in our society are functioning exactly how they were intended to function. It's not broken. Absalom Jones was not supposed to be a priest in a denomination or country that did not honor the fullness of his beloved black personhood. But you see, Jesus was and is that mediator. Jesus has a preference for the outsiders, his friends whom he loves. Absalom Jones's friendship with Jesus opened the way for conciliation to happen, or at least opened the door to the ongoing conciliation we must engage in today. Absalom Jones's very presence challenged what unity meant to many in his day. And we have taken a while to learn and are still learning what unity comes through, that unity comes through conciliation, fierce love, and living lives worthy of our call. So there was a time, and I'm thinking of, this is sort of like, I don't know if anyone has ever watched the Harry Potter movies and, you know, that name that never will be said. Well, there was a time when I used to preach or teach about the presiding bishop who kept the Episcopal Church together through the Civil War. And, you know, I'd always say, people like to say, oh, we have a big tent, everybody can stay in. Well, we were not supposed to stay together then. You know, that we stayed together, we're not supposed to be proud of that. That's a legacy that haunts us. It is unfinished business, and I wish we didn't have to contend with it. And it turns out both Absalom Jones and this bishop of our church attended Christ Church and St. Peter's in Philadelphia, which was pastored by William White, who was the first presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. Now, I never mentioned that name of the Civil War bishop because I was so disgusted by his lack of integrity as he placated and included slave-owning states in the councils of our church. But he actually has a name. John Henry Hopkins. And you all know your diocesan story, right? Bishop William White ordained Absalom Jones as deacon in 1795 and as priest on September 21st, 1802. And Jones joined the ancestors in greater glory February 13th, 1818. Well, Bishop White also ordained John Henry Hopkins, a priest, in 1824, 6 years after Jones's death. And 8 years later, in 1832, White consecrated and ordained Hopkins as the first bishop of Vermont. Yep. Hopkins went on to become the 8th presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in 1865, and I will add that nobody voted for him. That was just, you took your turn. When it was your turn, you took your turn. But anyway, he was a presiding bishop as the Civil War was ending. And he wrote a pamphlet and also a book. First he wrote the pamphlet, which was called The Bible Case for Slavery, and then he wrote something more, because when people said, are you kidding me? That's wrong. So he just hunkered down and wrote some more, and that book was The Biblical, Ecclesiastical, and Spiritual Case for Slavery. You can guess what it's about, right? And he said that slavery is not a sin. Holding people enslaved is not a sin. But he did view slavery as problematic because the growing numbers of slaves put white people at risk. He also feared inevitable rebellions and continued conflict between free and slave states. His solution was to buy slaves and send them to Africa if the slave owners would agree. He defended corporal punishment of enslaved people and refuted the supposition of the U.S. Declaration of Independence that says all men are created equal, claiming that, get this, it went against the teachings of Jesus. And how ironic that while in Philadelphia, he attended Christ Church, the church of several signers of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. He claimed a slave would not know how to use freedom. He wrote, "The slavery of the Negro race as maintained in the southern states appears to me fully authorized in the Old and New Testaments. Slavery, in my humble judgment, has raised the Negro incomparably higher in the scale of humanity and seems, in fact, to be the only instrumentality through which the heathen posterity of Canaan have been raised at all." And here we all are, rightfully celebrating Absalom Jones, a man who freed himself from slavery. He knew what to do with freedom. Celebrating a man whose virtuous life is a shining example of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a friend of God. And while I'm grateful William White ordained Absalom Jones, we all know that by excluding Black people from participating in the councils of the church, White failed to be a friend of Jones and St. Thomas Church. White's leadership set the example for Hopkins. And Hopkins let his power, privilege, and the sin of white supremacy enslave him. And as my dad said when he preached at my consecration, apostolic succession doesn't always succeed. How is it that men of the same church who would claim to be a friend of Jesus could be so different? And I wonder what Absalom Jones, Thomas Logan, John Hopkins, and William White would say about this gathering today. A Black woman bishop from Vermont preaching, the Bishop of Pennsylvania, a Latino man from a family who has been in this country before it was a country, and a room full of people evidencing the unity in our diversity, celebrating how blessed Absalom's friendship with Jesus brought each and every one of us here to this day. Blessed Absalom's patience, his faith, his laying down his life for his friends, for Jesus as friends, is paying off. It is no mistake that God brought me and my diocese together to learn about and wrestle with our history and find ways to let our bond of affection help the church to repent of past injustice. And I'm so humbled by this day of celebration that it has brought us together to revel in the tangled web of our common history. I have an idea of what Hopkins might think. Right now, I think he's probably spinning in his grave in my backyard back in Vermont. And I don't know what if I want to say that God has a sense of humor, or that God works in mysterious ways, or simply, God don't like ugly. What does it mean to be a friend of God? Later in the gospel we heard from today, it says, Pilate wanted to set Jesus free, but the crowd again yelled, "If you set this man free, you are no friend of the emperor." The company you keep and those with whom you associate is an indication of the way you live and love. And clearly, one can't simply say they are a friend of God and make it true. Hopkins' affiliation with the slave-holding movers and shakers, his friends in the South, deepened his defense of his evil views. You know, he did the landscaping and the drawings and all of that. We were both, I'm an artist and he was an artist. God is really funny. He designed Sewanee and set that up to perpetuate that evil. But anyway, Absalom Jones was not enslaved by the degradation foisted upon him. He helped create a beloved community which set him free to proclaim the gospel of love regardless of the chances and changes of this life. Being a friend of God is embodied in our relationships with family, community, and the church. And a friend of God sees people and creation holistically as a divine expression of creativity, giving... I will. A friend of God sees people and creation holistically as a divine expression of creativity, giving all of God's creation a place of honor. A friend of God cares about and acknowledges the needs of people, not just spiritually, but also physically and emotionally and psychologically. And now that our church has committed, because we go to General Convention, we vote, we actually said that, racism is a sin. We do all kinds of things. We voted and said who we are going to be. We're not there yet. But we've committed to becoming beloved community. We decided that being inclusive is a characteristic of an Episcopalian. So what do we do with our complicated legacy? I haven't known a time in my life in the church when I haven't had to struggle to ask for someone to respect my dignity, or felt like I had to remind someone that I too am an Episcopalian, and I've been so for most of my life, over 50 years. I have a little practice at it. And I know I'm describing familiar feelings and thoughts of anyone who is not white in this church. We have all of us landed on this Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement, some by birth and some by chance. We stay, have hope, and dream for beloved community, sometimes in spite of how we feel in a painful moment. Because you see, hope and love take over when our hurt or worldly sins might have us throw up our hands in despair and lose patience. Relationships, friendships keep us connected to the hopes we have for our church. And as we celebrate Blessed Absalom, how does his life help us to understand what it means to be a friend of Jesus, a friend of God? And Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you." Now, hearing Jesus allude to his crucifixion, one might wonder if we're called to lay down our lives in this way. After all, Absalom Jones attended to people sick with yellow fever. Well, no. I don't think it's a choice we're called to make. However, we are called to take risks and to have courage. And we don't struggle so much to lay down our life for our friend, but what about those who might not be our friends? Well, I'm not letting us off the hook in loving our neighbors, because there's a difference. Neighbors and friends are not the same, but that's a different sermon, so I'm not going to preach that one today. Today, we are talking about the love we live together as a body of Christ, as laborers in the vineyard, as those doing and seeking justice in a world and society that is plagued by scarcity and division. And this makes it so hard for people to celebrate the God-ordained beauty and the diversity of people. Jesus said to the disciples, "You are my friends." And he ties his understanding of the Greek words philos, friend. You all know about that word, Philadelphia, right? Philos is friend, and then agape, it's a word for love, one word for love. And we don't have the equivalent of that variety of love. So when Jesus uses these two words together, love and friend, he intensifies the meaning of friendship. And what is meant can be understood as a ride or die friend. The kind of friendship that withstands time and distance, a bond so intimate that it touches the soul and inner core. It is transparent and vulnerable. The friendship Jesus refers to is the kind which is rooted in love so pure that it exists before one knows or can conceive of it. You know that, oh, how I love Jesus because he first loved me and calls me his own kind of love. And as Jesus put it, this is the you didn't choose me, but I chose you type of friendship and love. Living his last hours with the disciples before his crucifixion, Jesus elevated the disciples to the level of this unique friendship. Knowing he would pass on his ministry to them, knowing they would be afraid and grief-stricken and lost, he gave them the key to finding their footing and direction in uncertain times. If they would remember their friendship, if they would remember his love for them, they would be able to see that being a friend of God combined with the power of that love is pure freedom. And blessed Absalom knew about that kind of love. Today he would teach us to seek friends, ride or die friends like Richard Allen was to him, and also to be that kind of friend. He would teach us to build communities of support and validation so that we can courageously choose freedom from all the forces that might diminish us. Like Absalom, who attended to those stricken with yellow fever, there is a plague, a virus, an insidious sickness we are called to attend to. It is racism. This means that while we work to bring healing, at times we will find people have fled the work because it is daunting. We will be blamed for bringing the sickness because we confront it. We will be in situations where we will wonder if the hurt and harm we sustain will overtake us. And we can't be completely safe from its harms just because we know it's evil. Because you see, racism is an equal opportunity infector, and it works differently on different people. But mostly it seeks division. And this is when the love of our friends is so important. We need to support each other in this work so that we can renew our hope and maintain our supernatural patience, which keeps us committed to doing justice. The love Jones had for the Black community, and they in turn for him, this friendship allowed him to be his truest and best self, and in turn fostered the inherent goodness in others. And I am certain this force of love and friendship with God moved the church toward integrity. But the work is not complete. And so we are in a liminal space, not unlike the time when the church could have split over the issue of slavery. We didn't choose to split because money and white supremacy kept us enslaved to fear and lies. And the legacy of this sin lingers as an impediment to our freedom and ministry to the world. And Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. You are my friends if you do what I command you." The church must continue to learn and grow in her capacity to be a friend of God. Like Absalom, we must immerse ourselves in the sacred text which animated his ministry of love and freedom. Like Absalom, we must pray, worship, and give our time and money to support the work of the gospel. Like Absalom, we must be creative and entrepreneurial about creating communities that strengthen our bodies, souls, and the bonds of love and friendship, which let us know we are never alone. like Absalom. We must attend to the love Jesus commanded us to share with each other, even as we attend to the world. As friends of God, we are called to lead our world on the path of freedom and love. On this day of celebration, Blessed Absalom asks us to be his friends, to be each other's friends, to be Jesus' friends.